Hi. So I'm back here in this room. It's my library, guest room, office thing, place, whatever. I'm hoping that the same sound won't occur that happened in the first video, but we'll see about that. Because I don't know. I don't know. I didn't like the lighting in the other room, but I'm not sure if it's because I'm using a different camera. For the last several videos, I'm using my little webcam thing. And for my first one, I used like this little digital camera thing. And so I'm trying to figure out if it was the sound and if the lighting is done by the webcam, which I don't particularly like the lighting because it makes me look as white as I actually am. White little pasty person. Anyway, here with another review. This one is the Kingkiller Chronicles by Rothfuss. The first one is The Name of the Wind. Tilt. Yeah. Anyway, Name of the Wind. It's about this guy. He's a magician, a sorcerer, a musician, an orphan, and he's hunting these, sorry, my fish are right there, Like, the entire fish tank. They're doing, like, some really weird standing on their heads things, But anyway. Both. I'm going to read the inside flap of this, just because it's awesome. Inside flap thing is actually a quote from the book. Not the first chapter, I think it's like the third or fourth chapter, maybe fifth. It's a thick book, So anyway, here's the flap, which just doesn't sound right. My name is Gvoth, pronounced nearly the same as Quoth. Names are important as they tell you a great deal about a person. I've had more names than anyone has a right to. The Adem call me Mierdre, which, depending on how it's spoken, can mean the flame, the thunder, or the broken tree. The Adem don't show up until the second book in the series. The flame is obvious if you've ever seen me. I have red hair, bright. If I had been born a couple hundred years ago, I'd probably have been burned as a demon. I keep it short, but it's unruly. When left to its own devices, it sticks up and makes me look as if I had been set afire. The thunder I attribute to a strong baritone and a great deal of stage training at an early age. I never thought of the broken tree as very significant, although in retrospect, I suppose it could be considered at least a little prophetic. My first mentor called me Lar, because I was clever and I knew it. My first real lover called me Dulator, because she liked the sound of it. I've been called Shadakar, Lightfinger, and Sixstring. I've been called Gvoth the Bloodless, Gvoth the Arcane, and Gvoth Kingkiller. I have earned those names, bought and paid for them. But I was brought up as Gvoth. My father once told me it meant to know. I have, of course, been called many other things, most of them uncouth, although very few were unearned. Continues on to the back. I have stolen princesses back from sleeping barrow kings. I burnt down the town of Trebin. I spent the night with Felurian and left with both my sanity and my life. I was expelled from the university at a younger age than most people are allowed in. I tread paths by moonlight others fear to speak of during the day. I have talked to gods, loved women, and written songs that make the minstrels weep. You may have heard of me. So begins the tale of Gvoth, from his childhood in a troupe of traveling players, to years spent as a near-feral orphan in a crime-riddled city, to his daringly brazen yet successful bid to enter a difficult and dangerous school of magic. In these pages you will come to know Gvoth as a notorious magician, an accomplished thief, masterful musician, and an infamous assassin. But the Name of the Wind is so much more, for the story it tells reveals the truth behind Gvoth's legend. Anyhow, that's the flap thing. Whatever. As you can tell, he's Most of it's narrated from the first person, although not all of it, which makes the story rather... It makes the story kind of iffy. If you are a fan, you know that there are mysteries in it, like in any good series, and you try to figure out what's going on, and some of the things, you're like, you think you know what the secret is, and you're just wondering why the hell Gvoth hasn't figured it out. And since it's all from the first person, you know that it's all there. But anyway, I'm going to read the prologue because the prologue is this beautifully written thing, and it's really short. Seriously, it's like one page. This here, that's the prologue. That's it. It's nice and short. But it gives you this beautiful sense of how the writer writes. And I'm sorry, I keep speaking to this. You know how on your webcam you have like this little picture of what you're doing? And I keep watching myself in it. Sorry! I'll try to do better. It's written almost like music. So, yeah. Prologue. A silence of 3 parts. 3 parts. 3 parts. Sorry. It was night again. The Waystone Inn lay in silence, and it was a silence of 3 parts. The most obvious part was a hollow, echoing quiet, made by things that were lacking. If there had been a wind, it would have sighed through the trees, set the inn's sign a-creaking on its hooks, and brushed the silence down the road like trailing autumn leaves. If there had been a crowd, even a handful of men inside the inn, they would have filled the silence with conversation and laughter, the clatter and clamor one expects from a drinking house during the dark hours of night. If there had been music, but no, of course there was no music. In fact, there were none of these things, and so the silence remained. Inside the Waystone, a pair of men huddled at one corner of the bar. They drank with quiet determination, avoiding serious discussions of troubling news. In doing this, they add a small, sullen silence to the larger, hollow one. It made an alloy of sorts, a counterpoint. The third silence was not an easy thing to notice. If you listened for an hour, you might begin to feel it in the wooden floor underfoot and the rough, splintering barrels behind the bar. It was in the weight of the black stone hearth that held the heat of a long-dead fire. It was in the slow back and forth of a white linen cloth rubbing along the grains of a bar. And it was in the hands of the man who stood there, polishing a trench of polishing a stretch of mahogany that already gleamed in the lamplight. The man had true red hair, red as flame. His eyes were dark and distant, and he moved with the subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things. The Waystone was his, just as the third silence was his. This was appropriate, as it was the greatest silence of the 3, wrapping the others inside itself. It was deep and wide as autumn's ending. It was heavy as a great river-smooth stone. It was the patient, cut-flower sound of a man who's waiting to die. And that's how the story starts, at the Waystone Inn. It's a beautiful story. It's complex, not as complex as Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, depending on if you're a reader or a watcher or both. Yeah, there's 2 books. This one, and the second book, which is The Name of the Wind. And there's a third book, a novella called, I'm sorry, I'm gonna grab it. The Slow Regard of Silent Things. It's from the perspective of a minor character, maybe. She hasn't really pushed the story any, but she's an important character to Gvoth, because he's the it shows a different side of his character, but it's completely from her perspective. It's a very interesting story, a very beautiful story. There's no dialogue in it, but it's still a very, very beautiful story. And there's 2 short stories. One of them is called The Lightning Tree. It was in the Rogue anthology, or Rogues or something. And I'll put a link to that too. And it's a really good one too. It's also told from the perspective of a minor character. Well, he's more major than Ari is, but he's a different character. Not the main character, obviously, but yeah, he's a different character. And I found that one really good too. It wasn't as poetic as The Slow Regard of Silent Fangs, but it was still really good. And it's one of my favorite characters, so of course it's good. But it gives a different dimension on it. But yeah, the characters are very dimensional. Just read them. They're good. It's really, really good. It is. It's well written. It's a good story. It's an interesting story. But like George R.R. Martin, he takes his own sweet time writing the perfect book. So if you don't want a long wait between books, you might not want to read it. But if you're looking for poetry, if you're looking for music, if you're looking for a beautiful written story, this is the one to go with. I also read some reviews that state that it's not a very good one. That they find the main character, I can't remember the words they used, but they didn't like it. But it's very polarized. You either like it or you don't. I love it. That's all I need to know. I love it. Okay. This is me signing off.